I'm going to open the floor for question-answer session, and here is a time to share your own dreams, your own campaigns, or share with us what campaigns are you doing, or you're launching, or what are you part of. But before I do that, I'm going to give the floor to Sylvie, who is also trying to launch a campaign of her own, and on the basis of Dragon's Den. Let her explain what she's trying to do.
Okay.
Yeah. So where are the roving microphones? Have you got them? Okay, come
I won't need a microphone actually.
Okay. No.
Because I am so short, may I just stand up here even if I am not one of the official speakers?
No, it's not
Really? Thank you. I feel honored. My name is Sylvia Bradwell. I am the founder and director of a charity called African People's Advocacy that was founded in 2008 to educate and engage African communities and people who are interested in African issues. Africa is a continent that is associated with war, famine, and all the negative topics that have been raised here today. If you would like to see an end to this, the key is to understand that for over 5 centuries now, since Africa's encounter with modern Western powers, Africa has been misrepresented as a land full of problems that only the West can solve. And yet every single thing that has been presented as a solution has actually led to the destruction of Africa. Such a destructive thing for human beings as slavery was presented here for centuries as the solution to Africa's savagery. Then after the so-called independence of African countries, such a fundamentally corrupt system as foreign aid, whereby you remove powers from local populations and give it to Westerners, and you have brutal, corrupt leaders who have absolutely no accountability to the populations. It is still presented as the solution to Africa's problems, when in fact it has failed to work for decades. And even as we speak, you are being exposed to emotional blackmail day and night with images of famine in Somalia, telling you to give handouts and that's the solution to the famine in Somalia, when in fact the reality is that within a year or two, when there is another famine, you will be asked to give more handouts, because the real problem is that in 2006 you had a government supported by Somali people, because it was able to protect and feed them, was removed by Ethiopian troops, armed and sent by Western powers. And that's the basic problem. But ladies and gentlemen, I am here with good news, because for the first time in over 5 centuries, we have the emergence of new powers, such as India, such as China, that do not have this track record of misrepresenting Africa as a land full of problems that only they can solve. But to grab this unique historic opportunity, African peoples need to be empowered in such a way that they will say to people, these are our ideas, these are our dreams, these are what we hope to do for our continent and for the world. To make this happen, we are currently filming a documentary called Pitching Africa, where groups of Africans with ideas will be pitching these ideas to philanthropists of all races, all religions, as long as they agree with what we are aiming to do. My question to you is, are you prepared to grab this unique opportunity? Are you prepared to be introduced to Africans who for the first time will be telling to you, these are our dreams for the world. This is what we expect to bring to the world. If your answer to this question is yes, please talk to me at the networking session. Thank you.
Well, I admire Sylvia because what she's trying to do is pair the entrepreneurs with the philanthropists and see if we can raise money for entrepreneurs for African continent. Yes, that's what you're trying to do. And if you got any feedback, is any of the speakers got a feedback of what she's trying to do? Okay, if you think of something, yeah. Okay, the floor is open for question answers. Can I have 3 at a time? Yeah? Okay.
Sorry, I forgot something. Can I just say something to the audience?
Yeah, in
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Okay. The lady there. Yes.
Hi, my name's Lee. I work for Womankind Worldwide, and we're part of a coalition campaign called No Women, No Peace. And I'm here as a critical friend to all of you because I believe we're here to improve our own campaigning. But I just wanted to remind you all that conflict affects women and girls really differently to men and boys, but when it comes to building peace, women's voices are sidelined. So you might not know, but in the past 25 years, only 1 in 40 signatories to peace agreements has been a woman. Only 16% of peace agreements have ever even mentioned women's rights, and most of those are to restrict them. So what I want to say is that we know that peace is only sustainable when the voices of the whole community, including women, are heard. And right now, 10 years after the invasion in Afghanistan, Afghan women's rights activists are standing there saying, this is what we want, this is what we need the international community to hear. Foreign ministers from 90 countries are coming together to discuss the future of Afghanistan. So what can we do as peace activists to make sure that their rights are heard? So I'd ask Uniting for Peace in the 4D campaign and the Peace Monday campaign to please remember that you can't build peace leaving half the people out. Thank
you. My thoughts on this are Maxwell Sainsbury from Essex. My thoughts could go into reams, I'm afraid, of words, but I know we haven't got time to listen to me. But what strikes me about all this, I totally agree with what our speakers say, totally agree with it. But what occurs to me, this is for world peace, and I don't think we're going to get anywhere in any sort of particular immediacy if we haven't got the ideas presented here this evening held by the rulers of the world, the rulers of our nations. I think this is the important thing today. We can't work on our own. Individuals are finding it very difficult to work for peace because the prevailing attitude doesn't allow it. And if we have the backing of the world governments, because they've changed their attitudes, like our speaker over here, to an attitude of peace and loving, if we've got the backing of the world community, yes, fine, we can get on with things. But I think we're held back. And the other thing is, I'd just like to add this, please. What I am rather concerned about is that these ideas give the idea of a sort of revolution in our human nature. And quite honestly, I mean, I feel that we should have this attitude of peace and love amongst us, and yet, because our human nature, our natural instincts, we want excitement in our lives. We don't want to be sort of very sort of puritanical in a very narrow sense. We want excitement. Can we not allow to indulge in excitement in its forms? Can we not allow ourselves to watch violence and yet become detached from it, in the sense that we agree that violence is wrong, but because we need to have our emotions and our moods sustained, can we not allow certain things to continue? I mean, otherwise we're talking in terms of changing the whole of society to to thinking, no, I can't agree with it, I'm sorry.
Okay, all right, okay. You made your point, Max. The lady over there? Yeah, you are the, yeah. Yeah, yourself, yes. Yeah. Who was, you're there? Okay, go on. Your name?
Yeah, my name is Lucy Bogwa. I come from Kenya.
Yeah.
I'm based here in London. And as you know, in Kenya we have lost one of the greatest athletes in the world. She was Professor Wangari Maathai. She passed away last week. So in Kenya we are mourning for one of the greatest women in the world. But there have been activities that should be buried this Saturday. So the world has lost a great woman. But myself, I live in London, and I do the campaign on Make Poverty History. And I say that we have to achieve the Millennium Development Goals by 2015. That is 4 years to come. That's a very short time. And I campaign on saying that we must include the faith groups in this campaign. Because the faith groups are the Muslims, the Christians, are the ones who have the grassroots connection. However, my friend Sylvia invited to this campaign, to this meeting today. And it's very important to tell you that United for Peace is connected to spirituality. I met one speaker who was talking about that. Christians are very peaceful people. And I know even Muslims are, but sometimes they are misunderstood. I've got very good friends who are Muslims. And so if we can connect this United for Peace and the faith groups, I believe it will work. And
thank you.
PJ's asked me to just respond to a couple of the things there. Maybe first to Sylvia, I think it's absolutely right that the misrepresentation of Africa is an age-old problem here in Britain. But what's much more difficult is to get over the whole idea of aid. Because we've gone around trying to say to people, actually, this constant push to get the aid, the 0.7% of GNI, which is the UN target figure, you're deluding yourself.
Exactly.
If you think that you're going to be doing any good for Africa, Asia, Latin America by handing out more, you've done it for the last 60 years and it hasn't worked. Economic development is not about it. Development is about far more. It's about the macroeconomic choices made. The countries which have succeeded in the Millennium Development Goals, to take Lucy's point, countries like China and Vietnam, they did it precisely because they didn't have aid. And they didn't follow the prescriptions of the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO, and the Western donors. They followed different development paths which were actually focused on their development needs and not on the needs of the rich West. So I completely agree with you, but that's a hard argument.
That's why we need the help of everybody, and we are starting. Let's make it happen.
And we took it to the Labour Party even in the conference they just had up in Liverpool and said this in an open forum, and even the most well-meaning of the left felt that it was difficult. But if aid won't work, be careful, because philanthropy also won't work. So think through that bit.
I think there's another issue about effective aid effectiveness.
There is an issue there.
So I think because of the problem that not enough aid is actually reaching people, the channels are a bit sort of corrupt and warped at the moment. That's an issue we need to deal with. We can't say that aid doesn't work because it actually hasn't been reaching people. The key now is to make sure that aid actually reaches people. So I don't actually agree with aid doesn't work. But the reason why it hasn't worked is because not a lot of it has actually reached people.
Absolutely, I completely agree. But it's not that aid doesn't work in terms of what it's aiming to do. It's just that economic development is something different. And the economic development needs more.
But aid funds is microfinance, and aid funds, economic.
But in the bigger sort of things, but how you can change an entire society around, it needs more than that. As far as the historical records we see. But the other thing I was just going to talk about was on the women's issue. Just to say, it's absolutely, I think, correct that the leadership shown by people like Wangari Maathai and other women who have taken that struggle. That is what we have to try and support. Not just women's participation, but women's leadership. And certainly from War and One's point of view, we do a lot of work together with trying to back women-led trade unions, women-led workers' associations, and other women's-led groups who will be able to take up that struggle themselves. And I think that empowerment is absolutely central to the type of societal change that we need. Because waiting for the world's government leaders to do it, don't think so.
Thank you. Jane?
so there were 3 or 4 issues that I think were raised there. On the issue of aid in Africa, I'm a big believer in a charity called Practical Action that people may have heard of, which is based on the ideas of E.F. Schumacher, the idea that small is beautiful, the idea of small-scale projects that work better, and I would agree that the best way to implement policies of that sort are to let the people do them themselves. You know, let the people get busy themselves. That's the best way to do that, I think, and that's more sustainable as well. The issue in terms of women, I think, is key. Obviously, you know, if you haven't got a policy which involves 50% of the population, you haven't got a policy, so I totally agree with your point. As for the connectiveness of religion, I think that in the age we live in, where issues such as climate change, peace, etc., are overarching issues that affect us all, affect all religions, obviously therefore the interconnectedness of religions has to come, even if, dare I say, as a secondary basis, the primary being the survival of the earth as such. So yeah, those are the points.
Thank you.
I'd just like to respond part to Max's point about excitement and violence. I have a colleague who works in the field of neuroscience, and what she has demonstrated over and over again is that what we are doing with our great exposure to violence is hardwiring our brain to expect a higher and higher hit. Right. This may or may not be human nature per se, but it is entirely reversible. That we can get that same hit from the feeling of love rather than fear. I'm minded to remember the words of Yoda in Star Wars that says, fear leads to anger, which leads to hatred. Right? Yes, we've a history of it, but we can stop it. But to stop anything, we need to have somewhere to go, and that somewhere to go is that excitement from love. I've been the victim of domestic violence. I have lived in fear of my life, and I have lived in love. I know which I would prefer. I think to go to the point about women's voices and being heard in the peace agenda, recent research has shown that what motivates people within the workplace is actually the sense of being cared for. It is higher than any other figure. Right. One of the issues that we've seen is that there has been a tendency to look and speak about the feminine as about emotion, as if we are not emotional beings. We are. I used to have colleagues who would joke with me about the impact of women's hormones, till I reminded them of the issue of testosterone and where that had brought us in the world. That usually put a stop to that line of thought. I think that what we have is an opportunity, and I think we are seeing a shift in consciousness, as Sister Maureen has said, right, that we can move much more towards the excitement that love brings, because love brings joy, it brings compassion, and it is at a much higher level. Thank you very much. I think that what we want to look at is why women's voices have not been heard, right? What is it that has kept women from being heard? And one of the things that you see, it is fear of women's voices, right? It is fear of the depth that a woman can speak, right? Men can speak with that depth too. We are all in this together. Thank you.
With regards to sustainable development, whether it's in Africa or Latin America or Asia or other places, one of the biggest barriers to sustainable development is the spending on weapons and the militarisation. And we see this playing out in a number of ways. It's weapons going into developing countries where there are conflicts in particular, and that erodes the democratic decision-making and the traditional decision-making processes, and the warlords take over and become more powerful. So that's one way it erodes. It's also the corruption in the governments of the developing countries that are spending money on weapons themselves rather than on development. And it's the money that's been spent by the developed countries also, and the way that they are then propping up corrupt governments in the developing countries to keep those arms going so that they then get more profit from them. So it's a really toxic mix, the weapons, the weaponisation and the arms race. That's why I'm encouraged by some of the initiatives which are linking the disarmament for development, which 4D is doing. That's very good. It's why I'm encouraged by the Costa Rica consensus, led by the Costa Rican government and now the former president of Costa Rica, Oscar Arias, where they are working with the developing country to developing country using success stories of demilitarization, such as in Costa Rica, where they abolished the army and have replaced some of the militaristic types of conflict resolution with not only the traditional mechanisms, but also bringing in regional mechanisms like the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which is helping them to resolve conflicts in the region. Oscar Arias has recently taken this to the United Nations, not just the Costa Rica consensus, which is encouraging the developing countries to lower their spending on weapons in order to have debt relief. That's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is implementing Article 26 of the UN Charter, where the Security Council has an obligation to develop a plan for demilitarization, for reducing spending on the military in order to free up resources for social and economic needs. There's a $1.7 trillion spent annually on the military. Just a portion of that, 10 to 15%, would be able to, if we directed for Millennium Development Goals, would be able to address the Millennium Development Goals. So I'm also encouraged that the religious and spiritual communities are getting involved in this issue now. We heard the United Religious Initiative, which is one of them. Religions for Peace is another. And the youth section of Religions for Peace started a campaign calling for the reduction of the world's military budget by 10% and the reallocation of that to meeting Millennium Development Goals. And these were just the young people in Religions for Peace. In 1 year they got over 20 million signatures calling for this, supporting that. So there's a lot of potential for this. The start to divestment now, where churches are starting to divest and governments are starting to divest from some of the worst companies involved in militarism, that's going to be very important because money speaks. With regards to women, I'm very encouraged that was brought up. I'll give the example from down in our neck of the woods, the Bougainville Civil War, which raged for 10 years. They've been unsuccessfully trying to stop that civil war for some time until finally they worked out you have to go to the woman. You can't just talk to the boys for the toys. They're going to keep fighting. And so the negotiators actually went and worked with the woman in Bougainville. They worked out a plan for resolving the civil war, and the way they could do that was to bring in peacekeepers unarmed, without weapons. And this was I think the first example of an international peacekeeping force going in to a civil war unarmed. And it's because they had the support and the backing of the woman there. Incredibly successful, the Bougainville mediation, which was based on the woman. Our organisation of parliamentarians, when we set up our first group of leaders, leading parliamentarians from around the world who are involved in this mix of issues, disarmament for development, most of the most incredible, active, committed ones who were seeing the connections between nuclear abolition and development and the environment were women. So our first group of 5 co-presidents were all women. I think it's really important to have that leadership. And the last thing is moving governments. I think parliamentarians are our connection between us as civil society and the policies of governments, because they represent us, they can ask questions, they can form policy. So calling on your parliamentarians to raise these issues in Parliament and in the party policy is important. Thank you.
We're ready for next set of 3 questions. Now, I've got a request that the questions be kept short, and also with the speakers, can you be please short with your answers? And then we can get lots of questions. Okay, I'm ready for next 3 questions. One here, the lady over there, and the lady over there. Okay.
But
yes,
it's not really a question, but those of you who have projects going on, if you need any support, if you think I could help, please come and see me. I want to get to it.
That's a good one.
Okay, I just wanted to share my experience as a women's rights defender from Iran.
Sure.
We supported a few campaigns, which I want to share one of them with you, which is the campaign to abolish the law of stoning. The law of stoning is the law that when a couple commit adultery out of wedlock, they commit that, they get sentenced to be executed by stoning, which is a very brutal sentence. Yes, yeah, you can Google it. I'm not gonna explain it here. What we did was to put pressure from above on the state via the network of lawyers, which started lobbying with the member of the parliament, with the judges, and with the people who had authorities. And also, we had a few NGOs who were supporting these campaigns, but the NGOs were shut down because of the state pressure. So, and the public sphere were very shrink and very limited, so we couldn't do much. And we wanted to put pressure from below on the state as well. And the power of new media helped us to make few documentaries and to make Facebook pages and make petitions. And through these documentaries and digital events that we had, we could raise awareness and consciousness towards this law of stoning, which is happening already in our country. And then nowadays it's they just stopped sentencing people, and we rescued 12 people from being stoned to death.
Your name, please.
My name is Sarish. I've just completed a master's degree in cancer therapeutics, so I have an interest in helping others myself as well. I'd just like to know, what is the company's action plan, the organization's action plan in obtaining or reaching the objectives that they've pointed out? Thank you.
Which?
Sorry?
The 4D. Okay. Your question. Okay.
How would you achieve the objectives that you have highlighted?
Okay. One more question we'll take. One more question. Okay. Yeah. Norbert. I'll take two actually, because that lady was a comment sort of, and you after that. Norbert.
Just briefly, especially for the press experts and whoever there is. My own experience, and I think Vijay's in part as well, is that there is a blanket over certain issues. They are just taboo, and journalists know it, and the editors will remind them if necessary, and if not, the advertisers will tell the editors. It's just a thought I have. On the other hand, you are quite right, and that should not stop you sharpening your message. Be imaginative. Use celebrities or whatever other foot you can get in the door and do it. But let's just remind me to ask you, there was this Disarm London arms fair. Coverage very poor. I think Ecclesia was one of the best newspapers who covered it. And there was, for instance, this one-day piece in the O2 Arena with Yusuf Islam. I think the BBC had a brief interview with Yusuf Islam. That's it. If you do Google News search, you get an idea. So there are, I think it may be learned disability, but I think there is more perhaps behind it. And it may need a different approach.
Thank you. Lady over there?
Just ignore the media, or whatever.
Yeah. Your name?
I'm Rosemary, and I'm currently working on the World Court Project's latest campaign, which is the criminality of nuclear weapons. So I applaud the connections made here in this campaign, and also wish to echo what Aaron's been saying as Proudly UK. I'd like to see the link made far more often between this crisis that we're in and the elephant in the room, which is these weapons that cannot be used, and in fact if they were used it would be a war crime. And that is what we're inviting the public to sign as an affirmation, which we're arranging to deliver to appropriate people, the first one being in Disarmament Week at the UN, because the dictates of public conscience in international law actually affirm international law when the people, we've heard what the success was with the Lead Mine campaign, realise the risks that we take, the costs of those risks, especially in terms of what we are not investing in. I think it's up to the public. It won't happen from the top down, it won't happen for governments. And this is clearly something which is, I feel, to be part of this shift in consciousness that is going on. It's an unacceptable situation to have in terms of...
Thank you very much. I'm just going to answer that lady's question. Okay, go on. Let's have another question.
What worries me is Somalia at the Horn of Africa, which is drought, and surely war on want, if they can't not do anything, because that is the title of your organisation. So what are you doing? Or what can you do? And basically...
Thank you very much. I'm just going to answer that lady's question, that what are we planning to do in future for OD, for World Peace Campaign? And some of the other questions can be tackled by the panel. First of all, we are in a consultation period with the other NGOs, like-minded and other organizations. We've got a symbol, a campaign, a start, and we know we are on the right direction. We are just sorting out the nitty-gritty, the small actions we shall be taking. But we are toying around with the ideas which I can tell you in our committee meetings and others. One of them is a 2-day international global conference next year, maybe in spring or on summer, which will be concentrating on what 4D plan should be, maybe for the next 3 years, from 2012 to 15 or whatever. That is one thing. And secondly, it is going to be a positive plan or campaign, because we see too many negative campaigns, and we are trying to shift that focus to a positive campaign. When I say positive campaign, let me give you 2-3 ideas which we are trying to do next year. One, create a media center for peace and non-violence, or culture of peace. Because, as you are aware, all media reporting, as Jen must know about it, is one-dimensional. And we in the peace movement mainly are sidelined or marginalized by the mainstream media. So, that's what we need, and we are so lucky or fortunate that now at the moment 2 billion or more people are connected to YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, MySpace and all that. So that's one proposal we are working on. Our second proposal is making, like the Mayors for Peace campaign, make your city or cities culture of peace city, which means you got to have plan to do your borough or your city, which means organizing peace festivals, events, making peace have peace museums, or culture of peace to be taught in cities, universities. Just a quotation to say on this one, that UNESCO quotation on the Declaration of Culture of Peace, which is said that since wars began in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. So that kind of a work. And the third, maybe, which we are toying around, is the global leadership summits, or heroes, or envoys, or ambassadors, what Emmanuel wants to be one Uniting for Peace ambassador. So that's what also we are trying to do, is have these. Why peace heroes? Because in each and every city you got monuments and statues of military heroes. So if they are so much visible, why we haven't got monuments and museum in our cities on each and every corner of peace heroes? Because peace heroes are one of the most underrated people in the world. All these peace, the distinguished contributors, all of you are sitting in the audience are really doing great work for your own city or your own borough, etc. So why are you not recognized? Why military heroes are more recognized? So these kind of things we are thinking of. Let's see what future takes us to. You want to? We can start from that side this time. You want?
No, I think we're done.
You are okay.
I'll smile.
Leslie, anything you would like to say?
Well, it's really just to follow on from what Vijay was saying about the action plan. At Rights and Humanity, we had a global congress a couple of weeks ago where Vijay was speaking. One of the things that led from that was what we called a climate of peace. People walked away feeling more at peace with themselves. And that each one of us has an opportunity to play our own part in bringing peace. Those parts are going to be different. Who knows what they are? But I think it's just to know that the climate is being created, and I think that's part of what Vijay is doing here. So it's working together, it's the interdependence, it's having the climate of peace. It's like Sister Maureen said, it's the inward peace.
But should we have inward peace when there's an unjust world, when multinationals and oil companies do things for their own profit? Should we let that be? Should that give us peace? Or should we fight it?
Well, it's not... It's,
I mean,
it's a very...
in anger.
Yeah. I think the issue is that what makes the difference is we can tell people what to do, we can nag them for what to do, we can confront them. The moment anyone is confronted with something, what happens? Brings out our defence mechanisms, right? One of the things it's about understanding. So it's quite right to feel passionate about something, right? But it's our approach. And I think if the approach comes from a position of peace and compassion, then we're more likely to get the results. We haven't got the results any other way. Fighting hasn't actually worked for us.
You do have to fight for justice, don't you? I mean, we have to fight for world peace. And perhaps we could have a peace tax. Perhaps everybody should pay a peace tax.
Not a war tax.
I think the issue is... Maureen, no, go on.
Maureen.
Just going to say that peace is not a passive thing. Where there's inner peace, and there's love, and there's compassion, there's a huge amount of energy to work in the world for a better and a just society. Where there's anger within, as Val said, it creates a resistance. And so where you get, resistance leads to persistence. And so anger leads to more anger, violence leads to more violence, and so you get caught up in a cycle of anger and violence, a cycle where one wants to prove that they're better than the other. And we see this happening in so many areas of the world. It cannot lead.
One country can
And
it's verbal anger, but not physical anger. There is a great difference between the two.
Actually, well, let me just finish my train of thought. We need to break the cycle. And I know when I've been in the presence of people who have a very deep state of peace, and yet are very active, that there's a state of inner peace and compassion, my own thinking begins to change because of the atmosphere that they create around them. Somebody who creates an atmosphere of anger doesn't enable a change of thinking in the other person. It's all about changing hearts and minds. I'll give you an example. It was very interesting. I was reading about Nehru recently, and in that book was a letter from Oppenheimer, who worked on a nuclear bomb, to Nehru when it was in the 50s. And of course the bomb had been used on Hiroshima. And it seems as if when people work on these projects, it's as if the conscience is somehow suppressed so deeply that they don't actually know what they're doing.
Well, they're searching for truth.
And here,
how it's used.
Excuse me.
So
here was a man who somehow woke up to what he was doing, and he actually began to study the Gita, and he really realized that what was happening was something that was going to lead to total destruction. He wrote to Nehru and told him, the US is doing something very terrible. I beg you, there's a particular, what is it, thorium or something, this radioactive material?
Yeah, uranium or
not
potassium?
Uranium, no, thorium.
Thorium.
Thorium, thank
Yes.
you. If you're asked to sell this to the US, if India's asked to sell this, I beg you, don't do it. I beg you, don't do it. The letter was pleading. I'm using this example because when a person's conscience wakes up, they begin to think differently, they begin to act differently, they begin to interact differently. And what we need in the world is for the awakening of the conscience that has been so deeply suppressed. And once the conscience awakens, then the original qualities of humanity awaken within. And this is what is going to lead to a long-term and a fundamental change. So that's what I want to say. Our university, which is in 110 countries, is headed by women. Students are men and women, but the heads of our university now are women who are in their 80s and 90s, and they are absolutely dynamic, and I can't keep up with them. So.
Okay, well, just in answer to the three speakers. First of all, hats off to the lady here. I think that's fantastic. The fact that you've helped save 12 lives is amazing. So, my hats off to you. Certainly, I want to say more. The gentleman here, Norbert, I think you mentioned the fact of, that there are taboo areas in the media where you mentioned the dicey protests in East London against the arms trade. I would agree with you that the mainstream media is far more difficult to get coverage of issues which we hold dear to our heart. Obviously you can ignore the media, it's not necessary all the time to involve the media in your campaigns. However, if you are to involve them, then I guess the ways that you're going to have success is always thinking of against the grain type campaigning. So you're thinking of different strategies to implement. As an environmentalist, I looked at things like the climate camp, yearly camps that used to happen at Heathrow, etc. And things like this get issues that are outside the mainstream on the map. You have to think of different ways of engaging the media. The media will respond to something sensational, unfortunately, and that's just the nature of the beast. And I do say that, unfortunately, on occasions. And then finally, in terms of the nuclear weapons issue, I think that the involvement of the International Criminal Court, the idea of treating nuclear weapons as a war crimes issue, is something that's gaining traction. We hear a lot about issues like that, and again, it's important that these supranational bodies like the International Criminal Court are given the respect they deserve, and all countries abide by their rulings and are prepared to take on board what they say. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Francis, you had one question on what we can do in respect of the Horn of Africa and the famine that's there at the moment. And one of the things that you said was in relation to how War on Want responds. You may know that many years ago they set up a Disasters Emergency Committee, DEC, which pools all of the different agencies which are involved in humanitarian relief. And so there is actually a sort of centralising force, so people aren't competing against each other, but that type of work is carried on as a joint thing. Now, War on Want was a member of the DEC up until about 1973-74, which was the huge and very televised, the first sort of televised African famine across the Sahel. And at that point, the people who were in charge of War and War actually said, well, we don't want to be part of something which just gives out the money and doesn't ask the questions of why the famine happened. Because a drought is a natural thing and a famine is not a natural thing. A famine is something which comes from political structures and disempowerment. And indeed, they did a long-term study of the situation in the Sahel which found that it was precisely the structures of land ownership and disempowerment within those villages which had led from a drought to a famine. So I suppose for me, so we're not now part of the DEC, while we obviously support what they're doing, but the key thing for me comes back to the question of asking why these things happen. And that wonderful quote from Dom Helder Camara, the Brazilian Archbishop, which was, when I give food to the poor, they call me a saint, and when I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist. And I just think for me, let's keep asking why these things happen.
Frank Jackson, a Vice President of the United for Peace and a former co-chair of the World Disarmament Campaign, which one of the two organisations joined together. I think we need to have a bit more of a long-term historical perspective for a start. Throughout the vast majority of the human existence, it has been a struggle for most people simply to achieve existence. And in that situation, it's not surprising that conflicts should arise. I think it was Max, talked about human nature. Human nature is enormously complex. It is not simply aggressive, as some people think it is. It is both aggressive and conciliatory. It's social and individualistic and lots of other things. And which particular aspects come out at any particular time depend on the situation. Now, we live in a world which is organised on the basis of capitalism, and I don't want to give a long lecture on capitalist economics, I don't think. But the point is that capitalism has actually achieved an enormous amount in economic terms. It has got to the stage where it is perfectly possible for all the needs of the world to be provided without conflict. Unfortunately, it is also predicated on A, competition, and B, continual growth. And it isn't because individuals, some of you may remember in the older members, at any rate, the Lowell cartoons where the capitalist who was pompous and fat man with a top hat, and he was oppressing the workers and so on. But individually, the people, even the people at the top of the multinational companies, which I am totally opposed to, they're not individually bad people. They are compelled by the nature. The bottom line is that they've got to make a profit and they've got to go on growing. And we need to get the collective views of the people to realise that we can't go on growth, but we've got to concentrate on the cooperative aspects. And I'm sorry, but it is not just a matter of individual feelings and love for one another, but it's the structure of society within which we work. I'm a retired engineer and physicist, and I worked. I did what I was told in industry. Some of it might have had applications in military aspect. I tried not to, but nevertheless, I was an employee. I was told what to do, and that is what the vast majority of people do. They have no other choice. So we really need to think much more fundamentally about the way the whole of society is organised, not just concentrating on the individuals.
Now, I know we could carry on for hours, but but our biggest enemy, the time, is with us.
Your biggest enemy, ours.
Yeah, ours. Yeah. Biggest enemy of ours with us. So I'm going to say a few words for the ending, but please don't go away because of two reasons. That once I finish, there is a prayer by Maureen, Brahmakumaris, and then up to 9 o'clock, our camera crew will be taking interviews, and if you like to say something about your campaign or share something, they will be happy to take your interview.
Plus networking.
That's networking.
Plus.
So, okay, we have heard thought-provoking comments from expert speakers and contributions from the audience. So, I hope we have analyzed some campaign successes and failures and become a bit more wiser to plan our next steps, to either launch our campaign or take it further. Thanks to our distinguished speakers, John Hillary, Jeremy Gill is probably not here, Jane Goody, Valerie McKee and Ellen Bear, and also to the contribution of Norbert, Maureen and Mendel. So please give them all a round of applause.
And Sylvia.
Oh, Sylvia. It's late in the evening. For me, it's getting Now, let's also thank all the contributors in the audience and also our committee and volunteers for making this evening a success. Please give them a hand. A word to the audience. I appreciate your tireless efforts in promoting peace and development agenda. May I request you to take a brief moment to reflect on the evening. If you have been inspired by what we are doing, then engage, spread the word, inform others of the good work we are doing, and better still, become our member of Uniting for Peace and support our campaign 4D for World Peace. And please take flyers, books and literature, and we are counting on your generous support. Let me say that private citizens have more power to do public good than ever before because of the rise of internet campaigning and the NGOs as a global movement in the development and developing world, alike as we are witnessing at present in the Middle East and North Africa. It is only appropriate to energize all of you before you go from this meeting by saying a few quotations or words of wisdom. Number one, well-running campaigns have no competitions. They make the competition irrelevant. That's by me. World peace is not a utopian dream. It can be realized by overcoming forces of destruction, violence, and warmongering. Another one from Heraclitus, and it says there is nothing permanent except change. Another one which says there are many elements to a campaign. Leadership is number one. Everything else is number two. The next one is by Robert C. Bye. Do not run a campaign that would embarrass your mother. Next one is by is by Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever does. Next one is from the inventor Edison, who says, can failure be route to success? I have not failed 10,000 times. I have successfully found 10,000 ways that will not work. Next one, which is my favorite one, and some of you have heard before, it is from Dalai Lama. If you think you are too small to change the world, try sleeping with the mosquito. I'm going to finish my talk by saying thanks all of you for joining us this evening, activists, thinkers and change makers. You have been a great audience. I know some of you have travelled from far today. Have a safe journey home. Thank you very much for being here. We do hope to see you again at our next event. But please don't go, because Maureen is going to give us a final prayer.
Thank you, Vijay.
Thank you. Changing consciousness is actually the seed of changing the whole paradigm of our world community. And so let us just reflect together and experience something of our inner world where huge changes can take place. Om Shanti. And take a few moments to reflect on my choices. Choice begins with my thinking. Am I able to choose my thoughts? What kind of thoughts would I wish to generate? Let us go on an inner journey and create thoughts of our original state, the original state of our humanity, our original state of peace. I am a peaceful being. And that state of inner peace is the gateway to many treasures within. To love, to compassion, joy, and wisdom. And these inner treasures are common to all humanity. And they give me inner strength, spiritual strength. In the awareness of my original state of peace and love and wisdom. Let me begin to think, to speak, to act. Let me express my real inner self and bring hope and goodness and change to my world. Thank you. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti.